Welcome to the Mike White Podcast, where I, Mike White, share my conversations and book reviews through my journey to learn all that goes on in this amazing world. Buckle up and enjoy the ride.
All right, today we got a book review on the Mike White Podcast, and this is one that I've been wanting to review for a while, and I want to make sure I do it justice. But what I'm decided to do now, it's Atlas Shrugged, and it's, I think, one of the most impactful books I've ever read and one of the most important books I've ever read. So I want to make sure that I do it well. It's so big, though, that I'm going to cut it up, and this first part, it's just going to be a review of one passage of Atlas Shrugged, and it's the Francisco's money speech, as they like to call it. So this one I'm going to do a little differently, and it's going to be just more of a free form, where some of the last book review I did, I actually just typed out an essay and then read the essay. But this I'm going to treat more like a conversation. So still trying out different forms of the podcast. I enjoy doing these book reviews, so I definitely plan to keep them, but I want to make sure that they add the most value they can to the listeners, because I like doing them both ways, both writing them out and doing this free form type talk. All right, so this passage is the context. So Francisco d'Ancona is one of the main characters in Atlas Shrugged, and this is at a kind of a party they're at. He's with one of the bigger main characters, Hank Rearden, and so they're both kind of captains of industry. Hank Rearden has a big steel company, and he actually makes a new metal called Rearden Metal. That's part of the book. I'm not going to give away too many spoilers, but he's a big businessman, very successful. And Francisco is also is a businessman, and he has like his copper mines. They're at a party, and one of kind of the anti-heroes, Bertram Scudder, says something about money being the root of all evil. So I'm going to go ahead and this whole passage is just Francisco's response to that. He's like, so you think money is the root of all evil? And he just goes into his speech. And yeah, I'll start out by reading the passage, or parts of the passage. And so he says, money is a tool of exchange which can't exist unless there are goods produced and men able to produce them. So that makes me think of, it's important to ask, what is money? And before we had money, it was all a barter system. So maybe I raised chickens and you made shoes. I wanted new shoes, so I could trade my chickens for your shoes. But what if you don't like chickens? How do I trade with you to get shoes? I have to find something that you like and then figure out how to trade to get that, so then I could go trade with you. So the inefficiency is just massive. And there's where money comes along. Money is that thing that we all agree upon has value, and it's like your receipt of productiveness in my mind. So you have to produce in order to get money. So you produce something of value to someone, and because they know it's valuable to them, they'll give you that money in exchange. It's worth more to them than it is to you, and vice versa. So in a true free market, and all those trades are win-win. We're both better off. That's why you trade. So in there, like Francisco talks about giving value for value. So in a capitalism and freedom, there are no trades where one person suffers, or I give you my chickens for like a net negative. In a win-win, we both win. I value the shoes more than I value the chicken. You value the chicken more than you value the shoes. We're good to go. And Francisco says in here, money is made possible only by the men who produce. So I think that's a key thing that is really, really controversial. It doesn't seem like it should be, that you have to produce before you can consume. But that goes against a lot of what economics is taught today. and the Keynesian style of economics, where they value the consumption to stimulate the production. So out of this passage with Francisco, it sounds like he's stressing like, hey, you need to produce, and that's where you get this certificate saying I produced, I added value, and we all agree upon these certificates being representative of that. So we're good to go. All right, so next thing, it says, when you accept money in payment for your effort, you do so only on the conviction that you will exchange it for the product of effort of others. It is not the moochers or the looters who give value to money. So there you go, right there. It's value for value, win-win. In a free system, it's not. So you got looters and moochers. He'll go more into this, but think of theft, right? And then taxation. So government can do that, and government, any tax they have is force, because good luck trying not to pay your taxes. Eventually they'll find you and they'll lock you up. So they'll use force. So I think it's a just analogy to say they're pointing a gun at you saying, hey, this much you produced right here, this is ours because it's been voted to be ours. So we have it now. Another quote he has in here is, those pieces of paper which should have been gold are a token of honor, your claim upon the energy of the men who produce. So he doesn't go into like why a gold standard is good or why the paper is bad, but ultimately the paper is bad because this is why I think this is so important for Bitcoiners, and Bitcoiners don't like this. Paper is not backed by anything. The powers that be can print more money, put more into the system. And that will, if there's more in the system, it will change your thought or your value of the money. But if you're constantly doing that, it's hard to judge. You have the time preference. So it's almost like you have coupons that expire with inflation, right? So of course, adding more units into the system is not the only inflationary pressure, but it is an inflationary pressure. Other inflationary pressures can be like supply side. So you saw that in part with COVID and all the troubles we had with getting goods out here. You have more scarcity. So supply goes down, demand is the same. Things are going to have to raise in price. So that's your other cause of inflation. But there's no doubt, I mean, some people argue here, but there's no doubt to me when you add units into the system, now each one of those units is worth less. So your purchasing power goes down, inflation goes up. Gold is inflationary, right? Like there are more units. If you can mine gold, we can find gold. Maybe an asteroid hits Earth that's full of gold, and you could add more units into the system. However, historically, empirically, the cost to mine and like the rate at which we produce more gold has been closely matched by the rate of productivity increase, which is productivity is a deflationary pressure. So as the productivity goes up, it adds a deflationary pressure. Adding more units of gold is an inflationary pressure, and historically, empirically, that has led to somewhat stable prices, which I don't think is necessarily a value. Or like, there's no reason that it's in a free system that you need stable prices. You do in gold because you can't keep dividing gold pieces. Like at some point, the amount of gold would get smaller and smaller, and how do you distribute that? That's why I think Bitcoin is so revolutionary, is you can have that fixed amount of units and not have the problem of divisibility, because you just go further and further into the decimal place. Like one Satoshi is a very small amount. You can think of like maybe sometime in the future, one Satoshi will not be enough and you'll have to even add more zeros to the decimal place. And I mean, this is okay. So we're forking off into a Bitcoin conversation here. I think that can be dealt with and agreed upon well. So that's why I'm still a Bitcoiner, even though eventually you got, all of goods and services divided up by 21 million Bitcoin. And then all the Satoshis, a Satoshi is like 100 million Bitcoin, or 100 million Satoshis is one Bitcoin. If it comes to the point where like one Satoshi is worth a ton, I'm confident there'll be a fork or some change in, or maybe another layer built on top of Bitcoin that can account for dividing that up into smaller pieces. But Bitcoin provides us with a very easily divisible currency. So that's why I think Bitcoin's a little better than gold. But I would be thrilled if we had this gold backed system that Francisco talks about. And yeah, it's a claim of energy. Like it's a receipt of productivity. So he says it's your claim upon the energy of men who produce, and you got to produce before you can consume. So I think those are the key takeaways here. All right, going further on, he says, quote, "But you say that money is made by the strong at the expense of the weak. What strength do you mean? It is not the strength of guns or muscles. Wealth is the product of man's capacity to think." So that is a key and a big push against Marxist thoughts and ideology of the muscle, the might is where you get value. Like working hard every day, that's where you get your value from. And what's so key about humans and revolutionary and why we have been able to thrive is our capacity to think. The thought leaders are the people that can create with innovation and ideas are the ones that truly change history and create just amazing products and services and inventions. It comes from man's mind, not necessarily someone with the most might or guns. All right, so further along it says, "An honest man is one who knows that he can't consume more than he has produced." Okay, so this is can lead down like the lending rabbit hole, right? So is Francisco against lending? I don't think so. Which lending is if you're taking out a loan, you are promising that you will produce in the future. So you're consuming before production. But in order to convince someone to give you their hard-earned money, you have to incentivize them. Like, this idea I have is so good, or something like that it's worth the risk. So I don't think he's saying like he's anti-lending here. It's just stressing that there has to have been some production. So even in the lending case, whoever's lending the money to the other person has to have earned that money productively, has to have created. And at that point, it is up to them to decide how much that money is worth. And so there is not a case where you have to consume before you produce. Everything is always production first. And it gets hairy, like Keynesian economics, where you want to just flood money into the system. It doesn't hold people accountable necessarily. So the person that lent the money, that produced and now wants to help someone else produce, is taking that risk and understands if that venture does not work out, if that fails, all that money is gone. But in the mixed economy type atmosphere we have now, there's moral hazard introduced when you have these companies, these big lenders that cannot fail, that they fail and they'll get bailed out by the rest of the taxpayers. And that system lends itself to more risk, and because you don't have the downside, so you'll have more bad investments, and it just builds on itself. And you have these companies that wouldn't survive in a free market but are surviving because there's so much of this easy money in the system. So that's what makes me think of those. They call them the zombie companies. All right, so moving down, money allows no power to prescribe the value of your effort except the voluntary choice of the man who is willing to trade you. Money allows no power to prescribe the value of your effort except the voluntary choice of the man who is willing to trade you his effort in return. Okay, so I don't think this is where some Bitcoiners might get mad at me, but I don't think fixing the money necessarily fixes this. Having money, like I see this more of a capitalism free market need than a good money need. Because even bartering, you could say that there could be bad government intervention that takes from you. So this is stressing the importance of having a separation of like state and economics, having a system where people can trade value for value as they please and not worry about what share the government wants from them, or they don't have to worry about someone just coming up with a big gun and saying, hey, you need to give me this percentage, like the mobsters do type thing. In a true capitalistic society, you'll have a government to protect your rights from fraud, from force of others. But other than that, there's no economic involvement. So I don't think having money in general lends itself to that. I think that's more of a understanding of rights, the nature of government, and freedom, a separation of state and economics. All right. Next part. And I'm skipping a ton of things here. So these are just the quotes that stood out most to me. I highly recommend you guys go and read this whole thing because it's very dense, and I could talk about that. Every single line has significant meaning, and it's important to the whole speech. All right, so next is, and when men live by trade, with reason, not force, as their final arbiter, it is the best product that wins, the best performance, the man of best judgment and highest ability, and the degree of man's productiveness is the degree of his reward. So that's where this is, again, I'm thinking of like government subsidies or weird tax systems that incentivize one product or service or than others. You can't have that and be moral or efficient, or it's just terrible. Because like, how do you know, like, there's a lot of these things that are so heavily subsidized, you don't know what would a free market would bring. And a free market is the best way to know each and every person's incentives. No central planner is going to know what you want, what I want, what everyone wants. Like, the only way to do that is to let people trade as they wish. So I think that passage of, if you have subsidies or force in the equation, the best product might not necessarily win because you have such an uneven push. So I think of like solar power for this. I'm not against solar power. Like, that's great. If you want to put solar in your field, on your house, go for it. But I don't know if it's economically viable without government intervention because they are so involved. Like, would a free market actually yield investment in solar? And that's, I think, one of the most glaring examples of our energy cost and the energy situation around the world of still many people lacking abundant energy is this push for solar and wind. And the only way they're viable is with theft, taxation, subsidies, stuff like that, tax breaks. And that's not free market. So I think it would be moral, way more moral, and just better off if you let the people decide what kind of energy they want. Now, if if for some reason you can prove objectively through the law that like there's a limit to the amount of CO2 that should be in the air, which I am very skeptical of. I think everyone should read Fossil Future by Alex Epstein to go more into that topic. But say they do, there's an objective court and they say, okay, this is the limit. That means all these energy producers must be capped at this much through emissions. The market would adjust. The market would say, okay, if we're not using this, if we're caring about these emissions, how are we going to supply all this energy that people want and need? I find it hard to believe that that's going to be solar and wind. I think nuclear would be the best option there, but I don't know. It's not a free market, so I don't know. The current system we have is very much centrally planned, and I think that's unfortunate because, as you've seen throughout history, the more centrally planned something is, the worst off it tends to be. And I don't think you can argue that. There's so much empirical evidence from, you go to communism, you go any time and economically is more free, you have more human flourishing. So I think Hong Kong is a great example of a place with almost no natural resources. It's just a freaking rock there by the ocean, and they were able to thrive basically just through people respecting contracts and rights, a very limited government intervention in the economy. So I'll go into the next quote. All right, quote. But money is only a tool. It will take you wherever you wish, but it will not replace you as the driver. All right, so further along, money will not purchase happiness for the man who has no concept of what he wants. Money will not give him a code of values if he's evaded the knowledge of what to value, and it will not provide him with a purpose if he's evaded the choice of what to seek. So that the hatred of money, I think it's more of a hatred of, I don't know. Yeah, it's complex, but right here he's saying people think, oh, if I just had more money, I'm going to be happy. So all these people that are poor, if they just had more money, they're going to be happy. And I find that very difficult to believe. I think if you don't know how, like, where does happiness come from? And in my view, it's the production, it's the productive achievement type stuff, building, doing, providing, where that, like, just having money isn't going to do anything for you. You have to have some work behind it. You have to have a value system. You have to have a philosophy to truly be happy. Otherwise, I think having no philosophy is more on the evil side. But it definitely stresses that money's not going to fix your problems. Like, all right, so now the next one is about like inheritance. So if you guys think about if there should be an inheritance tax or not, here's what Rand writes for Francisco. Quote, if an heir is equal to his money, it serves him. If not, it destroys him. But you look on and you cry that money corrupted him. Did it, or did he corrupt his money? Do not envy a worthless heir. His wealth is not yours, and you would have done no better with it. Do not think that it should have been distributed among you. Loading the world with 50 parasites instead of one would not bring back the dead virtue, which was the fortune. Money is a living power that dies without its root. Money will not serve the mind that cannot match it. Okay, so there's a lot of, like inheritance tax. I think initially it's wrong because it's whoever made the money, whoever owned the money, it's their choice what they want to do with it. No one else has a claim on it, not the government, no one. So if they choose to give it all to their kids, that's their choice, and that's totally fine. Now, does that mean their kids are going to have future success? This is what Rand is saying. It does not guarantee any of that. If you're not fit for the money, if you don't know how to keep it or produce it or do things with it, it will go very fast. And I think you've seen that. I guess there probably are studies on that, but just empirically and historically, a lot of heirs lose their fortune pretty quickly. And there's some that keep it, and I think it's silly just to blame, oh, he's started out on with that much, of course he's going to be successful. Just like you see people that win the lottery. There's people that win the lottery and then they lose it within a couple years. Just having money doesn't really mean anything. It doesn't mean you're worth that much and can keep it and can produce an equivalent amount. All right, so moving on. If the source is corrupt, you have damned your own existence. Did you get your money by fraud? By pandering to men's vices or men's stupidity? By catering to fools in the hope of getting more than your ability deserves? By lowering your standards? By doing work you despise for purchasers you scorn? If so, then your money will not give you moments or pennies worth of joy. So I think I like the used car salesman. Those guys that are selling lemons to families that want cars or excited and being borderline fraudulent, they're not living a good life. Like maybe it's not fraud, but it's dirty, right? And those people cannot be happy. And yeah, you can think it's evil, but it's not the money that's doing that to them. It's themselves. It's their philosophy, their way of life. If they truly valued their life and had a good set of values, they wouldn't be doing that. Like, I would not be envious of anyone like that just sells their soul to make money. That I think of Bernie Madoff. This is fraudulent, right? But he was miserable. Like, the happiest he was once he got caught and he's in jail and he could let it all off his chest. Like, living a life you despise, no matter how much money you get, is not a good way to live. All right, moving on. Or did you say it's the love of money that's the root of all evil? To love a thing is to know and love its nature. To love money is to know and love the fact that money is the creation of the best power within you, and your passkey to trade your effort for the effort of the best among men. That's why I do revere money. I value it. I love it, right? Because it is someone producing. It's the lifeblood of the economy, of work, of people's lives. People, ideally, they've got a lot of pride. They built something. They did something of value. And in return, we use money because we're not bartering. So you should be proud of having this ticket of productiveness because you earned it. And to love that, there's nothing wrong with that. That's totally moral. All right, quote, "Run for your life from any man who tells you that money is evil. That sentence is the leper's bell of an approaching looter. So long as men live together on earth and need means to deal with one another, their only substitute, if they abandon money, is the muzzle of a gun." Yeah, so all these people that think money is the root of all evil, they might say, "Oh, I'm not communist. I still believe in capitalism, but people should give back, give their fair share back to everyone else." So whose fair share? Who decides that? And what's the enforcement? All this anything other than a free market capitalist system is done with the use of force and coercion. And I think that is wrong. If you think you deserve someone else's money, like, how much of their money do you deserve? Like, who decides that? Are you going to go over there and ask them for it? No, you're going to use the government. You're going to vote on it and have them take it from you forcefully. But then, even in other countries, they have mobs and they'll straight up go to their businesses with guns and say, "Hey, you owe us this much of what you got," type thing. So if you don't have a system of freedom and of free trade, of valuing money, it's ugly, it's force, it's brutality, it's stealing, it's theft. Capitalism is peaceful. It's the most peaceful, most moral system out there. All right. Money is the barometer of a society's virtue. When you see that trading is done not by consent, but by compulsion, when you see that in order to produce, you need to obtain permission from men who produce nothing, when you see that money is flowing to those who deal not in goods, but in favors, when you see that men get richer by graft and by pool than by work, and your laws don't protect you against them, but protect them against you, when you see corruption being rewarded and honesty becoming a self-sacrifice, you may know that your society is doomed. Yes, that one hit hard because if you look at today, it's pretty bad. Like if anyone thinks we live in capitalism, you are greatly mistaken. It is such a mixed economy. There's no lobbyist in capitalism. Like why do people have to spend so much money for lobbyists in Washington D.C.? Everyone's trying to fight against one another of the laws and the regulations and how much of an impact they have in their bottom line. It's ugly. And if you think about it, it doesn't have to be this way, and it's gotten worse and worse. The best example I remember is Microsoft got attacked for giving out Internet Explorer for free. They got like prosecuted under antitrust laws saying, oh, that's not fair. And before that, they had, I think they might have had like a zero, like no lobbying budget at all. But after that, they had to start spending, put a guy in Washington, start spending more and more on lobbying and regulation. And that just adds more inefficiency. Like you're having to protect against the people that are supposed to protect you. The government is supposed to protect you from violations of individual rights, but they're out there finding ways to how to wring you dry, how to get the most money out of you. I think is totally immoral. Just keep the taxes are just like subsidies, like any of those type of stuff. Weird tax laws, subsidies are more direct, right? But they're all taking away a free market. They're adding these variables of central planning and mixing market signals. So the more that happens, the more inefficient the market's going to be. And it's just straight up immoral. So we shouldn't be doing it anyway. Immoral in the fact that if you respect rights, you respect property rights, you realize that people earn their money and it's their money and they should decide what they want to do with it. All right. Destroyer sees gold and leave to its owners a counterfeit pile of paper. This kills all objective standards and delivers men into the arbitrary power of an arbitrary setter of values. Gold was an objective value, an equivalent of wealth produced. Paper is a mortgage on wealth that does not exist, backed by a gun aimed at those who are expected to produce it. Paper is a check drawn by legal looters upon an account which is not theirs, upon the virtue of the victims. Watch for the day when it bounces, marked account overdrawn. Yeah, so that's our system. It's so corrupt. It's so much is done to mix with market signals, and it's not a separation of state and economics. You can think of a great example is so in here they're talking about if it's paper, they can change the number of units of the currency, and they can decide where to ingest those extra units whenever they want and where. So totally immoral, right? Like picking favorites and causing a significant inflation when inflation really hurts everybody, but even more drastically the people that are starting off their careers or that don't have a lot of money. And that rise in the price of food is a significant expense for them because food's probably one of their biggest budgeted items. So I think that's just terrible overall. But yeah, and then also just like the fact that I guess this passage isn't the best one for my point on Signature Bank, but Signature Bank was shut down pretty arbitrarily because they didn't like their dealings in cryptocurrency. And the fact that the government or regulating bodies can do that, I think is very scary and immoral. All right, quote, "You stand in the midst of the greatest achievements of the greatest productive civilization, and you wonder why it's crumbling around you, while you're damning its lifeblood, money. You look upon money as the savages did before you, and you wonder why the jungle is creeping back to the edge of your cities." Yeah, it's no what do you call it? It's not, what's the word? Happenstance. Um, the fact that there's so much hatred of money, these ideas of communism, of socialism, of being your brother's keeper, of you didn't build that, giving your fair share back to the man, giving back like you took something from people. These ideas are so small, they seem innocent, but they really aren't. These are terrible ideas that can collapse an economic system if you truly live by it. And take a look. If you truly wanted to implement those ideas of equality, and I'm not saying equality, I am a huge proponent of equality under the law. I think that's great. But you have people today that saying, "Oh, the wealth gap's too high," right? Income inequality is wrong. That's a problem. We need to make sure it doesn't get too high. Like, so at some point when you make so much money, that magically becomes more of the states. Like, these ideas are scary because you've seen them in action. You've seen communism. You've seen what Pol Pot did in Cambodia, where it's mass death. Like, it's not just it's uncomfortable, yeah, but more people are dying, and it's brutal. It's cold, and this is why I'm so passionate about Bitcoin. Is it's rooted in the ideas of freedom, and a lot of society today is rooted in collectivism and being your brother's keeper. And if that infiltrates the economy and our economic system, it's not going to be good. It's going to get uglier and uglier. The more free we are, the more humans will flourish. The phrase about the evil of money, which you mouth with such righteous recklessness, comes from a time when wealth was produced by the labor of slaves. And yeah, that's totally valid. So even Robin Hood, I don't see Robin Hood as a hero, but I also don't think he's a villain, because he was living in like a monarchy, right? Like they didn't, whatever people produced, the king could just take whenever the king wanted to. So those systems, yeah, it's unjust, it's messed up, but that's not capitalism, right? If in capitalism, if you had your Rockefellers, your captains of industry, JP Morgans, and there was a guy stealing from them, that would be wrong. Like, I would not support that at all. These guys earned that money, it's theirs. But back in the day, you had terrible system. You had slavery. Like, it's just the ugliest of all, right? Like, literally using chains and whips to force people to work for you and for your own benefit is just totally unjust and immoral. And yeah, I hope those people got stolen from, or theft was happening because they didn't earn it, right? Like, that's not the system we have today. Like, in America, we don't have that anymore. There's not force. We're pushing for a free market. As much of a mixed economy it is, there's still a chance that we can go back to a freer market. And you can't take that contempt for the old systems where the people with money were oppressors. You can't relate that to today. The people like Elon Musk today, he's not an oppressor. I guess he's probably not the best example because of how much government intervention was caused in Tesla or some of his companies. I still think he's probably a brilliant entrepreneur. So you think like Steve Jobs, he didn't his wealth is not the same as those kings or as those slave owners back in the day. Like his wealth is very moral and just, and it's his. He owns it, and he earned it without violating people's rights. So to have that same hatred of Steve Jobs' money as you do to the oppressor's money back in the day is just not rational. All right, here another passage I liked. To the glory of mankind, there was, for the first and only time in history, a country of money, and I have no higher, more reverent tribute to pay to America, for this means a country of reason, justice, freedom, production, achievement. For the first time, man's mind and money were set free, and there were no fortunes by conquest, but only fortunes by work. And instead of swordsmen and slaves, there appeared the real maker of wealth, the greatest worker, the highest type of human being, the self-made man, the American industrialist. If you ask me to name the proudest distinction of Americans, I would choose, because it contains all the others, the fact that they were the first people who created the phrase, to make money. No other language or nation had ever used these words before. Men had always thought of wealth as a static quantity, to be seized, begged, inherited, shared, looted, or obtained as a favor. Americans were the first to understand that wealth has to be created. The words to make money hold the essence of human morality. It's the classic zero-sum fallacy, right? Like fallacy. It's not, wealth is not a pie. It's not fixed. We can make pies. We're bakers. It's not like if I make money, it doesn't mean I take from everyone else. You can produce and add value. And that zero-sum mentality is just super detrimental. And because it was zero-sum back in the day a lot, right? So like when you weren't free, everyone was trying to loot from one another. And it's just both an immoral society and very inefficient society, very dangerous, dark, bad place to be, time to be alive. So the more free, the better. All right, last piece. When money ceases to be the tool by which men deal with one another, then men become the tools of men. Blood, whips, and guns, or dollars. Take your choice. There is no other. Yeah, so I choose dollars. I choose Bitcoin, but same thing, right? Or it should be. And that's true. Like, what's the alternative? If you don't have a free system, you're gonna have, what do you want? You want socialism, so some freedom, and then the means of production are controlled by the state, or like the state's not going to do any better. The state has all the same blind spots as people do, and have none of the accountability, right? So, and it's just moral. Like if you produce the fruits of your labor, like they're yours, you can decide what you want to do with them. Not some governing body, not the person with the biggest gun. Like that's the system I want to live in, is voluntary win-win trades. I trade with someone else because it's going to make my life better. They trade with me because their life will also be better. And capitalism is the system built off this principle. So I don't think there's a better, like, concise passage in a fiction book that explains the virtues of capitalism and money and the value of money and how you should be proud of money than Francisco's speech in Atlas Shrugged. So, if anyone wants to read Atlas Shrugged, like, send me a message. I will ship Atlas Shrugged to you. I'll limit that to like 50 because I don't know, maybe this podcast becomes popular 10 years in the future, and then getting like thousands of requests. That'd be a lot of money. So I'll let, like, first 50 people that want me to buy them a copy of Atlas Shrugged, I'll do it. Yeah, I think it's one of the best investments I've ever made in my life is reading that book. And that's probably an understatement. Like, I can't describe how influential Ayn Rand is to my quality of life, and it is truly life-changing. So I hope you guys pick it up, give it a read. Love to hear your thoughts. I'll talk about that book all day, and Ayn Rand, her philosophy. So that's all I got on the Mike White podcast. We'll be doing an interview next week, but hope you enjoyed the free-form book review. Leave a review. Let me know what you like or what you didn't like, and y'all have a great week. See ya.
Thank you for listening to the Mike White Podcast. Be sure to follow us on Instagram and TikTok at Mike White Pod, and subscribe to the YouTube channel. Y'all have a great day.